want to welcome you to this Legislative Advocacy 102 training. My name is Jonathan Covey. I'm the Policy Director for Texas Values. Also joining me, Mary Elizabeth Castle, our Government Relations Director for Texas Values. And we wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of legislative advocacy during our 101 training, which, as you may recall, if you were a participant, was during the last 2-week process. So about 2 weeks ago, we had our 101 training. This is a little bit more advanced training. This is called Legislative Advocacy 102 because we're offering a little bit more advanced knowledge and understanding of some of the legislative processes, how things work in the legislature, so that you can feel comfortable as you go and advocate for issues of faith and family and freedom. So without further ado, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the past successes in Texas Values. As you may recall, and we've talked about in the past, Texas Values has had quite a few legislative successes over the years. Some of those include a recent law that was passed, the Texas Heartbeat Law, back in the 2021 legislative session, the 87th legislative session. Also, something that we're acting in continuation upon now, the Save Women's Sports Law that dealt with protecting girls in middle school and high school sports from biological males competing in their sports. That was also in 2021. And the Freedom to Worship Act, which, as you recall, during the pandemic, a lot of churches were being forced to shut down by local government authorities. And the Freedom to Worship Act was passed not only in statutory form, but also as a constitutional amendment. And you got to vote on it in 2021 to protect churches' right to stay open and protect the rights of Texans to be able to worship freely as they choose. Also, a number of other bills in the past, victories that Texas Values has had, the Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Law, if you recall, back in 2019. Also, the Pastor Protection Law, protecting pastors, passed in 2015. And then a number of other ones, including the Merry Christmas Law, which was one of our first victories back in the 2013 legislative session to make sure that people can continue saying Merry Christmas and celebrating and having their religious freedom to do that. So many victories in the past. As we move forward, we're looking to have a great session, this session during the 88th session, talking about more issues related to banning gender modification and transition procedures and treatments for minors. In addition to that, we will be continuing the Save Women's Sports coverage and issue to extending that to college sports and protecting women in college sports. And we'll talk about that a little more about that later on as we give a legislative update. But just a quick reminder for you. Well, actually, Mary Elizabeth Castle, our Government Relations Director. Mary Elizabeth, welcome to the webinar. And you had a quick reminder for folks about an important upcoming date.
Hello, everyone. You may remember us mentioning this on the last legislative training, but this is a second reminder and maybe a first reminder for some of you that if you want to take the information you're learning today and put it in action, we have our Legislative Action Day that we call Texas Faith and Family Day that is just around the corner. It's on March 13th, and it'll be from around 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. And we'll be there at the Capitol, making sure that we're advocating for our values, all of the bills that Covey mentioned and that we've been mentioning in all of our materials and on our website. You can have an opportunity to express your support of these issues to your legislator and any legislator you choose at the Texas Capitol on that day. This is something we have every session. So it's definitely something you want to be a part of. It'll start with a briefing session where we talk about the particular bills that we're advocating for. We'll even talk about some bills that we don't want to see get passed. A lot of those that go against our Christian faith and Christian values. And after that, we'll have a rally where you'll hear from great speakers like Abby Johnson, Riley Gaines, and Corey DeAngelis. And you'll also hear from some of your state senators and state representatives at that rally as well. We also provide a boxed lunch for you, which is at the low cost of $5. And then after that, you are free to roam around the Capitol to go to as many offices as you desire to talk to these legislators about these bills that we want to see pass this session, and you get to be in the driver's seat. You don't have to wait for someone else to talk about these issues to the legislators. You can do it yourself and have that sense of agency on that day, and we'll teach you how to go talk to them. We'll give you one-pagers to hand out to the offices. We'll give you instructions on what to say and who you need to meet with. So it's definitely a day you don't want to miss. Something special about this year is that we're trying more and more to increase the participation in the event. So we want to make sure that people all over Texas and not just Austin and surrounding areas can make it. So we have buses coming from Dallas, Houston, and I believe other parts of the state. So please go to our website, texasfaithandfamily.com, so you can sign up for that day, but also find out if you can get on a bus if you're in a different part of the state to come down for that day. So you don't want to miss it. And also our partners will be having, CWA will be having a dinner that night as well, and you can purchase a ticket for that on that website too. So be sure to sign up for Faith and Family Day.
Thanks, Mary Elizabeth. I appreciate that reminder. You know, we appreciate everyone being on here for this 102 training. We covered some things during our Legislative 101 training relating to kind of the basics of how committees work. In addition, how a bill has to go from the House to the Senate and the Senate to the House in order to pass. And that was kind of a basic 10,000 foot overview of how the legislature worked. But we want to go into a little more specifics. So I want to give Mary Elizabeth the floor again to talk a little bit about some of the floor procedure that goes on when a bill actually makes it out through committee and comes back and is able to make it before the entire body of the legislature. We call this getting on the floor. So Mary Elizabeth, if you would, give us a little bit of a summary of how some of that works so that folks can get a little more comfortable with the process as we go forward.
Yeah, so you may remember we gave kind of a general overview on the process of how a bill becomes a law, but we wanted to talk more in depth about some of the particular stages of how a bill becomes a law. And one part of that stage we really wanted to focus on this time is when a bill reaches the floor of a particular chamber, whether it's the House or the Senate. And so what that simply means is that the bill is no longer under consideration by a special committee or work group, which is what we talked about last time. We talked about how bills go to committees and how you can testify and participate. But after they make it past that point and in the House make it past calendars, then they'll have to be on the floor. But now the bill has progressed to be under consideration by the entire body. And we'll focus first on the House procedure for that. So once the bill reaches the floor, the author or the sponsor of a bill begins to discuss the bill at the front microphone. So if you've been to the House or Senate chamber to watch them, it's the microphone furthest away from you that you can see closest to either the speaker's desk or the lieutenant governor's desk. And they will lay out the bill. And that means that they will basically discuss the bill before the body, explaining what the bill does and why they're passing it. So to do so, you can also have people ask questions on the bill during that time. So unfortunately, it's not just that legislator talking about their bill and then they take a vote. You have to be open to debate on that bill as well. So any member of the House or any member of the Senate, well, in the Senate, it's a little different. So in the House, any member of the House can go to what they call the back mic. And this is probably the microphone you don't really get to see when you're sitting in the House gallery, but it's at the very back closest to the door. And the House member can come up and debate them on their bill. And so to do so, they have to ask the member to yield for questions. So you can't just go up there and start debating. They do have formal procedure. And the author is not required to recognize a member at the back microphone, but out of courtesy, they almost always do. Typically a lot of the legislators we work with, they're very courteous and they yield the back mic. to those who oppose them, but some of you may remember when we had someone at the front mic opposing our Save Women's Sports bill, we had a legislator who wanted to debate their opposition at the back mic, and that person actually said they didn't want to yield the mic. So there may be occasionally times where people don't yield the mic for debate, but typically they do, and they'll be asked questions that should go to strengthen the argument of why we should pass this bill. Like, that's the original intent of why we have this debate on the floor. However, it can be used for other reasons to gain political points or just to be completely adversarial. So the House rules actually sets a limit on how long the members can speak. And those of you who have been in the chamber, you probably have a hard time believing that, but they actually do set a time limit on how long they can speak on the bill. So the author may speak for 20 minutes when opening and closing debate, and other members are limited to 10 minutes each time they address the House, with a maximum of 2 times to address per bill. And there are numerous motions that can be made on the House floor, but there are a handful of important ones. So a successful motion to recommit a bill back to a committee, for example, will immediately send the bill back to the committee that it is considered. And that's something you do not want to happen to a bill that you support. You don't want it to be sent back to committee, especially if this is April or maybe even March, but especially if it's April or even May, because that could basically almost kill your bill if you don't have time for it to go back to committee, be reconsidered, and then get back to where it can get on the floor. A motion for the previous question will end the debate on a measure and bring the House to a vote on the immediate question. And while this is not a motion, a member of the House may make a parliamentary inquiry to ask questions of the chair, usually the Speaker of the House, who is often assisted in responding by the House parliamentarians. So I know many of you, I've seen you ask, he's the guy with the bow tie and that lady next to him. Those are the parliamentarians, and they tend to be experts at the House rules. They know them forwards and backwards. And whenever there's an issue of, let's say, a point of order, or like I just said, a parliamentary inquiry, they have all the rules and they can help with making a ruling on that particular issue. And I don't know if we have a next slide, but I think we're talking about calendars now. So when it comes to the Texas House, before it gets on the floor, you have to make sure it gets through calendars committee. And this sounds simple enough, putting your bill on the calendar for the House floor, but this is where bills can get tripped up as well. So it's very important to understand this process. So some of you may be familiar with the calendars committee, which determines which bills get on the floor by either approving them or not. So they really have a lot of power on whether or not your bill makes it to the final stages. And so in a typical session, about 7 to 10% of all bills die without making it out of House calendars committee. So that just shows how powerful they are. It's not just simple, let's try to get each bill on a calendar day. There are intentions sometimes to not vote a bill for it to be put on a calendar, and that's how a bill can die. But if a bill does make it out, it will be assigned a place on the House daily calendar. And the House daily calendar is a compilation of 8 sub-calendars set in a particular order. And unless the rules are suspended, the House takes up each bill in the order it appears. The emergency calendar appears at the top, followed by the major state calendar. The next is the constitutional amendments calendar, which is reserved for House joint resolutions and Senate joint resolutions that would amend the state constitution. The next, and typically the longest, is the general state calendar, and that is most likely where you'll find the bills that you care about. And this is technically followed by local and consent, then resolutions, and congratulatory calendars. The calendars committee determines which sub-calendar the bill will land on. If the House adjourns without considering a bill, it carries over to the next day on what is called the supplemental calendar. The Senate's process is slightly less convoluted, thankfully, and does not include 8 sub-calendars. So if you grasp the process on the House side, you will find yourself understanding the majority of the Senate side as well. And the entire process at times, can be kind of confusing, but it's very important that you understand these different steps, because you want to be involved at each one of them, increase your understanding. Because sometimes, you'll leave a hearing, you testified, or you heard someone testified, and you're like, we're good, right? Well, now after that hearing has to be voted out of committee in the House, it'll have to be voted to be put on a calendar, and then it will have to go on the floor, and you'll have an opportunity to actually watch that floor process when they debate it on the floor. So this is very important information for you to have, so you can understand, why is my bill taking so long, and why hasn't the governor signed it? It's because there are these several steps in the process, and this is just very helpful to know, and you can participate in these parts of the process as well.
Mary Elizabeth, thank you. The summary that Mary Elizabeth just gave for floor procedure is hopefully going to help you a lot, because there's a lot to understand. There's a lot of information that comes across, and sometimes you see it, but you don't understand it. And since this webinar is being recorded, you're going to be able to go back and you can review anything you feel like you may have missed, because I know it's a lot of information. Also, we're going to try to have questions at the end. So just to circle back on that, if you have a question that comes up in your mind, make sure you type it into the Q&A chat function, and we will have our producers on the back end monitoring your questions and give us some of your questions as we get to the end, as we have time. So another important part of understanding how the legislature works is understanding the parts of a bill itself. Next slide should show you the parts of a bill. And this list is not exhaustive, but there are a number of specialty provisions also, like savings clauses, severability clauses, sunset provisions, bracketing provisions, all that get inserted into a bill depending upon what the bill is doing. However, the major provisions of a bill that you're going to see about 90% of the time are those provisions here up on the screen that you see. And so even having a high level understanding of how they fit together and is going to prepare you to begin reading more bills, continue deepening your knowledge. So what you see is parts of a bill include, they have a heading, you have a caption, you have an enacting clause, and then you have definitions. So you'll see these definitions in quotes at the top of a bill. You have your principal operative provisions, you have your enforcement provisions, and you have your repealers and your effective date. And so that's kind of how it breaks down. On the next slide, you'll see kind of a breakdown. And I don't know how it's showing up on that screen. I hope it's large enough to see, but you'll see kind of a breakdown of how this works with an actual bill. So this was a bill filed back in the 86th legislative session by Senator Bob Hall. It was a bill on traffic control cameras, on red light cameras. Ultimately ended up becoming law because it got rid of red light cameras. But you can see, and I shortened the bill some for the purposes of this training in the operative provisions, but you can see at the top, there's the heading, and it always starts, it says, a bill to be entitled an act. That's always the heading of a bill. It always says the same thing. And then right below it, it's what we call the caption. This is just usually a one sentence summary of what the bill actually does. Often it's vague and ambiguous, and it always begins with the words relating to. So you'll see this one says relating to prohibiting the use of photographic traffic signal enforcement systems. Below that, there's an enacting clause. This is important because this is how you actually enact the legislation into law. And you'll see it says, be it enacted by the legislature of the state of Texas. And those are the magic words that every bill has to contain in order for transcribers and the Attorney General and so many other people in state agencies to know that this is how, this is what the legislature has enacted. And then you'll see below that the principal operative provisions. This includes sections 2 through 5, but you'll see it starts out with a code. So you see over here, it says Chapter 707 Transportation Code, and then it goes in and it underlines each change that is being made. Sometimes you'll see an underline, which means that words are being added to an existing code, and then sometimes you'll see a strike through, which means that words are being removed from an existing code. And that's how they go through section by section. And whenever a code changes, they have to start a new section. So there are a number of codes that could be in a particular bill, and you might have to make changes to accomplish your purpose in transportation code. That might be in section 2, in government code, that might be in section 3, and so on and so forth. So just to go a little bit more into detail, you can see the principal operative provisions. They are the substantive, or what we would call the main provisions in a bill. So they're usually organized in one of two ways. They're either organized alphabetically by code and arranged in numerical order, or they're listed according to the importance. And when they do that, they usually put the general provisions before the more specific provisions. So the last method is not chosen as often as the first, but if the last method is chosen, the drafters are required to make sure that each provision fits together in a way that is not confusing, or doesn't confuse those who are reading it, so that, for example, it doesn't make sense until you read a provision that comes later in the bill. So they have to think all of that through. Also, all the provisions of the same subject are usually grouped together. And the Leg Council drafters, they insert headings anytime there are 3 or more subsections under a main section. That's an important rule. An important rule that applies to principal operative provisions is that language that is used in one subsection only applies in that one particular subsection. For example, if a statute has an A1, like you'll see here, A1, A2, and A3, and a modifying clause at the end of A3, that clause only applies to A3. It doesn't apply to the other 2 subsections. Let's switch gears a little bit and move on to discussing the Texas Legislature online website. There are a number of helpful things that you can utilize with this website to accomplish. It's actually quite a robust website for a state legislative website. And if you want a free way to set up and keep track of bills that you're interested in, or get alerts on bill movements, this site actually does the job quite nicely. Let me see if I can. I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment and then go back to sharing my screen. If I can pull up this site here. You let me know if you can see this. Mary Elizabeth, can you see my screen on the TLO website?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, so you can see here on the Texas Legislature online website, there are a number of things you can do. And we talked about this last training. You can search for bills. For example, you can put in HB 23 and hit go, and then you'll pull up and you'll find that this is a bill by Representative Swanson on saving women's sports. You can click history and it'll come and it'll tell you, okay, the bill has been filed right now. So you know that there hasn't been any other movement on it. But in addition to doing that, and I talked about this as well, you can also go to reports and click the tab up here at the top that says general reports, and then go click today's filed bills if you want to find out how many bills have been filed today, what are they, who are they by. So we can see right here that 69 bills have currently been filed on February 23rd, that's today. And then you can go through and you can see who filed them. Well, Representative Dutton filed a bill relating to the storage of wine. Representative Leach filed a bill relating to the age at which juvenile courts may exercise jurisdiction over a child. And then you can actually click this language, click the bill itself and read the language. So it's very robust in that way. Let me go back to the beginning. The other thing you can do if you want to keep track of a bill list yourself is you can come over here and you can click on My TLO. Actually, just run your cursor over here. It says My TLO, or click on it, and then you'll see you have a few options. You have an option to create bill lists, option to create alerts, and option to create saved searches. The other two are just mobile device support and a technical programming feed. But the top two are going to be your most important two. If you can click on this, for example, and if you haven't already opened an account, it will require you to open an account with TLO. You just have to give them, it's free. You just have to give them your email address and create a password. And what it'll do is it'll show you that you can create a list of bills to follow. And this is really cool because you can create basically a list with an unspecified amount, max amount of bills on it. So for instance, I have here, I've created Jonathan's bill list, and you can see that it's all bills related to gender modification bans. So all I have to do now is come and hit run. And you can see right now I've only entered 2 bills into the process. There are a lot more than that, but for purposes of this training, I wanted to show you kind of how you enter a bill. So you can see I've already entered HB 1532 by Representative Nate Schatzline, also HB 1686 by Representative Tom Oliverson. Let's say I wanted to add an additional bill to this bill list. Well, I come over here and click selected bill list, and then I can come down and I can type in SB 625, which is Senator Campbell's bill on gender modification bans. Click add, and you'll see that it ends up being put into my selected bill list. And then I can go back to and click bill lists, run it again, and well, let's see, it didn't update. Well, you're actually supposed to hit save as well. So if you add your bill, and then you can hit save, and then it over here in the top right hand corner, let's try that again. SB 625, we hit add, then we hit save, and now you can see it was added to the bill list. We have 3 bills on there now, and the benefit of this is that you can keep track of all the bills of your different issues, and you can tell, okay, I have the author of each bill. I know when it was in, I know what was the last action. I know that it was introduced. I have all the pertinent information about a particular bill. If you want to, you can also click this check mark up here that says bill numbers and comments only, and it'll just show you the bill numbers. And in the drop-down menu, it actually allows you to make comments of your own on these particular bills, so that you can comment on them, say, okay, well, I like this bill, here's the reasons why, or I don't like this bill, and here's the reasons why. So this is very helpful. In addition to that, you can also go to bill alerts, click on alerts, and it will bring up a way to create alerts on different bills. And this means it'll send you an email if you want to know when a bill has moved. So you, like, for example, HB 1686, this is my example bill. If you want to know when this bill has been referred to committee, there are a number of actions you can click on, but if you want to know when it has been referred to a committee, which is the next step in the process, you select it out of this drop-down menu. If I want to add another bill, I'll go in and I'll type in SB 625 and hit enter, and there it is. And now I can select the drop-down menu. Well, I'm getting a message here. There it is. and then I can select report it out of committee. And that just means I want to know when the bill has been voted on and comes out the other side of the committee. So you can set up alerts on all different kinds of actions throughout the legislature. You can also just set up alerts to know when each time a bill moves, which is a very helpful feature as well. But this kind of gives you a free way to understand or to keep bill lists and to be able to track bills as you're following the legislature, so that you know exactly at what time a bill moves. And a lot of professionals and lobbyists also use this method to track bills. So it's a very helpful feature. We at Texas Values, we currently have a more advanced software that we're using, but for many years, many of us have used this to keep track of our legislation. And as a site, it's a very robust site. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here, and we will go back to our PowerPoint real quick. And we'll share again if we can. Well, not letting me share. 1 second. Let me know if you can see here. All right, Mary Elizabeth, are we good?
We're good.
All right, so you can see a lot of different things you can, and I have a number of little subtitle screenshots here. You can see that there are different ways to track bills. There are also different tabs in TILO. That's what we call Texas Legislature Online, TILO, which lets you look at different bills, the introduced version, House Committee Report version, the engrossed version. These are different versions of the bill as they're at different stages in the process. Let's move on a little bit. So in terms of a legislative update, I want to touch on a few priority issues that Texas Values is going to be working on this session. We've been working on. If you remember, last session, we got a bill passed to protect girls' athletics in middle school and high school. And the original legislation included protections for college as well, but along the way, it got left out. And we still currently do not have protection for women in college athletics. And this is a major problem because not only are women missing out on opportunities for scholarships and fair competition, but women's sports is effectively being rewritten and erased. And Title IX, which is the very statute that is supposed to be protecting women, is being rewritten. So when you look at elite runners and athletes, and they're sprinting 100 meters or they're racing many miles, once athletes hit that elite level, that physical maturity, the best men have anywhere from a 9 to 12% advantage over the best women. Fortunately for this issue, there's an incredible amount of momentum on our side to keep men out of women's sports. And this is due in large part to a University of Pennsylvania swimmer, Leah Thomas, who dominated the women's swimming competitions last year. A lot of you may have seen this on television. And everyone now knows that this situation is not just a hypothetical situation. Men are actually taking trophies away from women in their own sports. And this has given our issue unbelievable impetus to get this issue done. So what we saw is Senate Bill 649 was filed by Senator Mays Middleton, and House Bill 23 was filed by Representative Valerie Swanson to protect women in athletics. These are two of our top priority bills this session to uphold fairness in women's sports. Another important priority is banning gender modification procedures and treatments for minors. This is important because treatments and procedures like this are permanent and they're harmful. And kids simply don't have the physical maturity or the forethought to recognize the harm that they would have to endure for the rest of their lives. We don't let kids buy cough syrup over the counter at CVS. We don't let them get tattoos or drive a car. So it's incredible that adults would want to let them make these kind of lifelong irreversible decisions. And one of the things that didn't make it on this slide was cross-sex hormones. Doctors use them all the time for teens that they're quote unquote helping with transition. And the use of cross-sex hormones it comes with a whole bunch of known risks, but they're being billed by the other side as harmful, non-harmful, irreversible, reversible, and really helping the transition. But they come with all sorts of different side effects and harms, including infertility, severe liver dysfunction, coronary artery disease, increased risk of breast and cervical cancer. What we do know is that children are struggling with their gender identity, and families deserve compassionate care. They don't deserve experimental care and harmful medical intervention into their lives. So we worked with Representative Oliverson's office and Senator Donna Campbell, both highly respected doctors and physicians themselves, as well as legislators, to ensure that children and their families are able to really be able to receive real help instead of getting false hope from the other side. So it's a very important priority for us this session. Oh, I skipped over one slide, and we'll run over this real quick. Our losing my voice a little bit. This is our pro-life priority, parental rights legislation. You can see that one of our focuses will be finding new ways to support mothers and their babies now that Roe is overturned. And we have to be ready for them, which is why we're working with other partner organizations to increase funding for the Alternatives to Abortion program, which is already the largest funding program of its kind in the country for helping moms with pre and perinatal care. And then for parental rights, we have to protect kids from pornography and obscenities in public schools and public school libraries. We also need to make sure that there's an opt-in for sex education in the law this year. There was a sunset provision put on it last session. So I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of what we're currently working on legislatively. And at this point, I just want to ask our producers on the back end if we have any questions that folks have submitted, and we'll take time to see if we have a few questions we can answer before we wrap this up.
I can put these, I believe, on your screen, but there is one from Dr. Ed Travis. Are you seeing that on your end?
I'm not, but let me stop sharing my screen.
I'll read it for you. For women's sports and similar issues, why not propose a separate gender identity in Texas for a separate division of sports competition, restrooms, dressing rooms, etc.? That is for all those who want different recognition than biological. They can dress and compete against all others like them and not invade biological sex divisions.
Mary Elizabeth?
Yeah, well, that would seem to be a solution to the problem. However, there are just several reasons why that might not necessarily work, and why that not be the way that we would want to go about things. For number one, they do not want a separate category. What they call themselves transgender athletes. They are men who do want to compete in women's sports to make a point that they are women. So a lot of these transgender athletes aren't even saying that they identify as transgender. They're saying they are women when they are actually biological men and anatomically men, and they're competing in women's sports. So I think, even if that were offered to their side, they would probably immediately reject it, because their whole point is they are men who want to compete in women's sports and who claim to identify as women. Secondly, I think, as an organization and even as people who represent these issues, I think we do have to stand firm and not concede, to that side. Once you give kind of them the right to feel like they, have something to do, even if it's like their own category, giving them their own category recognizes their ideal of transgenderism. So if you say, let's have a transgender category for sports, then you're conceding to the fact that genderism exists. And that's not something we want to do, because we believe that people are male and female, created by God, and that we have these sex separated spaces for a reason, which leads me to my last point, which is the most important point, is that, Title IX ensures that you have a right to sex separated sports and sex separated spaces. And of course, Title IX ensures that women have their right to compete in sports and have educational opportunities without those things being trampled on. So it's clearly the law. It's been the law since 1972 that we have these sex separated spaces. So we shouldn't be allowing or having to concede or make up a third space if the law clearly states that we're allowed to have these separate spaces based on male and female, man and woman. So the law clearly recognizes and gives those rights. So we should just follow what the current law says until it is changed. And it doesn't look like Congress is going to change that anytime soon. Regardless of what you're hearing from the Biden administration, it doesn't look like they're going to overhaul Title IX as far as what it says legislatively. So, those would be my reasons for why, we would probably not support that at the moment. I think our main focus is making sure that we protect women in sports, protect them in private spaces as well. But clearly, if you listen to some of these stories, like by Riley Gaines and others, these are men who should be in men locker rooms because they have men body parts. So it's not even like they need their separate space. They just need to be in the men's space.
Yeah, I think you make a good point too. With they don't actually want this themselves. They are trying to make a point that they are women, and therefore putting them in a separate category would kind of defeat that purpose. But as with some of the other arguments with transgenderism, some of it doesn't make sense. I mean, you have some folks who claim to be binary, and yet the claim itself to be binary means that there are some binary people and some non-binary people, which just creates a binary system again. So, but I think that the point is well made, which is that they're not seeking this either, and so it wouldn't be a solution for either side. We have another question.
We do. This is from Mary Trini Toller, who asks, where can I get a copy of the Freedom to Worship Act?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Well, if you want to go on to the Texas Legislature online website that we were talking about a little bit earlier, you can actually type in HB 1239. Surprised I remembered that, but it's actually the number for the House bill that was passed during the 87th session, which is called the Freedom to Worship Act. And it's available free online. You can just click on the PDF and you can read the entire thing from beginning to end on the Texas Legislature online website.
As a follow-up to that, Mary Trini also asks if there is a Texas Values Advocacy group in Lubbock.
So we have our main office is here in Austin. We actually have two offices here in Austin, one at the Capitol, one up towards the north part of the city. But we are in a lot of different cities around Texas, including Lubbock. And we do events in those cities: Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, San Marcos, different places. And we'll have a list of those on our website. Usually those events start more after the legislative session is over, but we have groups of people who are big supporters of ours, and we'd be happy to get you in touch with other Texas Values supporters if that's something you'd be interested in.
This is from John Haymack. What bills are related to gender modification?
Yeah, thanks, John, for the question. So there are a number of bills related to gender modification bans, and I try to be real careful to say that this is a ban on gender modification in the Texas House and Texas Senate. The two that are priorities for us are number one, HB 1686 by Representative Tom Oliverson. He's a anesthesiologist and a physician out of the Houston area, and then SB 625, which is filed by Senator Dr. Campbell. She's an ER physician based out of the San Antonio, San Marcos area. And these are our part of our priority legislation. There are a number of other gender modification bills filed by Representative Steve Toth, Cole Hefner, Brian Slayton, and others. But those two are the ones that we believe are going to accomplish best the objective of getting rid of these harmful procedures and treatments.
There are a few that are saying that they appreciate that we did this webinar. So thank you, Mary Elizabeth and Jonathan, for conducting this interview today.
Well, we're thankful to our supporters for tuning in for this webinar for Legislative Advocacy 102. This has been recorded and it will be available for you on YouTube. And if you have any other questions, our Texas Values Policy team, including our president, Jonathan Sines, will be available to answer questions by email on policy issues. And you can, if you have any questions just generally related to Texas Values, you can email info@txvalues.org. And we're thankful for everyone tuning in today, taking your lunch hour on a Thursday to join us for Legislative Advocacy 102. Mary Elizabeth, you have any concluding thoughts as we wrap up this webinar?
No, just making sure we got all of the questions. I know that there were some in the Q&A box as well.
We have a few in the Q&A box here.
That is where I'm reading from. A few came in just in the last few seconds here. If I use, I'm sorry, from Stacy Matson. If I use TLO, will it tell me when I am able to testify?
So the answer is yes. It will tell you when a committee hearing has been scheduled. If you set up the alert correctly, like we discussed, you can receive an email alert when a committee hearing is scheduled. So that will tell you, that committee posting will tell you the time and the room in the Capitol that the committee is going to be taking place, Stacy, and then you can plan to be up here at the Capitol to testify on one of those bills that you're interested in. So yeah, the answer is yes, it will do that for you. And if you set up those alerts, it should work quite nicely.
The last one I'm showing is from Sylvia that says, are there any bills in Texas like the one in Kansas against Walgreens or CVS to prevent them from selling abortion pills over the counter?
So there definitely are efforts to try to stop this expansion of chemical abortion in the state of Texas. That has become quite the endemic, solution the abortion side has had to many states becoming completely pro-life after the Dobbs decision. We've seen an increase of smuggling and mailing of abortion pills illegally to many women, which has devastating effects. But yes, legislators are very passionate about closing up some of the loopholes. You may remember that in the second special session last time, we were able to pass a bill that banned the mailing of chemical abortion pills and put certain parameters around those pills, like you have to see a doctor, there has to be a blood test for Rh negative blood. They have to know how far along you are. And it was another way to make sure that we could get a handle on these chemical abortion pills being distributed. There are some definitely issues of them being mailed internationally. And so legislators are passionate about stopping that and being better about tracking the mailing of these pills, because they are illegal under current state law in order to mail those. So they are passionate. No bill has been filed yet, but they are working on that. And from my understanding, CVS and Walgreens cannot distribute those pills in Texas because of our current laws. So while they are able to do it in other states, that tends to be because they didn't pass the same type of laws we have. But with our current Texas laws, from my understanding, they're already prohibited from being able to do that. But that doesn't mean we should rest on that issue. I think it's still important to be active and still important to speak out. I think there's a letter campaign that Students for Life is doing, to where you can actually write the CEO of Walgreens and CVS to make them know that you do not stand for that happening. But the legislature is working very hard to close some of these loopholes on the chemical abortion pill issue.
Well, we want to thank everyone for their questions, for the interest in this webinar. And we are going to go ahead and wrap up now, but remember that we continue at Texas Values to be your boots on the ground for faith, family, and freedom. And we hope you'll continue to join us as we give weekly updates online on Facebook as the legislative session progresses from our policy team, and as well as other places at txvalues.org, as we join you to give you information about what's coming next and what you can expect at the Texas Legislature. So thanks for joining us for Legislative Advocacy 102 Advanced Training, and we'll see you back again here next time.